Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're going to start a new series called On the Workbench. So this series is really about working on trains. So we're going to be maintaining trains, fixing trains, even upgrading trains. So basically anything that's on the workbench is what this series is all about. So today's video, episode number 1, is going to be about changing traction tires on your Lionel Acela engine. So this engine requires a couple of very special things when you're changing the traction tires on it. And so if you have this engine and you need to change your traction tires, or maybe in the future you will, this video will help you do it the right way so that you don't mess anything up and your engine still runs perfectly after you're finished replacing your tires. So let's just jump right into it. Alright, so to get started on this repair, you're going to need a couple of tools. You're going to need a fine tip Phillips screwdriver, a little larger one. This is a number, let's see, this is a 0. This one's actually not marked, but make sure you have the right tools so that you're not stripping out your screws. We got small screws, really small ones. We got medium-sized ones, so make sure you have all that. You're going to need a very small tip, flat-bladed one, and you're going to need a pair of needle nose pliers to do this job. Okay, so where do we start on this? So really, if we kind of zoom in down on the truck here, we've got first 4 screws that we need to remove. There's 2 larger ones right here in the center, and then we've got 2 smaller ones out here near the ends. So this is just to remove this bottom plate. So let me take this off and we'll come back. Okay, I've got those 4 screws out. Now you want to remove the screw that holds on the pickup, the collector here, the one screw right here, on the end that has the traction tire axle. So this is the axle with the traction tire. This one is not. This doesn't have a traction tire. So you want to take that off so we can take this out. And just as a side tip, if you guys buy one of these trays like I have, this is made by Craftsman, but you can get, they make different ones. This is a magnetic tray that will hold all your parts so you don't lose them, these tiny little parts. But also you can keep your parts together. So there's the screw for the collector and there's the collector, and they will sort of like just stay together because it's all magnetic in here. Great little tool on your workbench if you don't have one of those, so just something to keep in mind. Okay, now this part is the part where it really gets into the micro stuff here. So our next piece is to take, there's a pin right here, and this little pin right here is held in by a C-clip, which is right back here. And there's one of these on each side. So these 2 pins have to come out in order for you to get the axle assembly out. So you're going to use a very small flat-bladed screwdriver to do this. It's going to be finicky, and then you got to make sure you don't lose this little C-clip because it's super small. If your eyesight's not that good for close-up work, you're probably going to want to get something like this, which is like a magnifying mirror, right, that you could use on top of it. So let me zoom out here so you can see it. But basically, it's a one of those lighted magnifying mirrors. If you don't have that, right, you're going to need something like that because these are super small parts you're dealing with here. But if you can see that little C-clip right there, that's the piece that you need to get out. And even the camera doesn't want to focus on it, so small right here. But it's right there. So all you have to do is get these clips off, and then you can pull these little tiny pins out, and that's your next step. So let me get those removed. Okay, so there it is. There's the tiny little C-clip. You can see my screwdrivers are magnetized, so that's another thing. If you don't have a magnetized screwdriver, you can get a little tool that you just run over your screwdriver to make it magnetized. So I've got the one clip and the pin out, and so now I'll just get the other side out. Alright, so there I have the bottom plate off, and I've got my little pins out. You can see all the gears that are sitting in here. Make sure you don't flip this over or this falls to the side. All these gears are going to fall out all over the place, and you're going to have a major problem, right? So you don't want to do that. All we want to do now is get the bearings out by lifting them up, but they are held on by this little decorative wire right here on the outside. So you sort of have to just negotiate it out of here to get it out of the bearing. And that's all you're going to do. Just very carefully. Don't go crazy with it because you're going to break the wires on the side. And that's it. So now I have my axle assembly out of the Acela. Okay. Now underneath here, if you guys can see this, right underneath these little bearing things, you see these springs right here. You got to be super careful, right? They have these suspension springs, and there's, let me pull them out here. There's actually a spring within a spring here. Okay. I don't know if you can see that, but there's like, let me see if I get in the camera here. 2 little springs. There's a spring within a spring. You got to be very careful you don't lose these, and they have to stay together, right? And they have to go back underneath there before you put the axle assembly in. So just when you're pulling this apart for the axle assembly, these springs can fall out, and you got to be really careful you don't lose them, okay? And that's it. Don't bend this a lot or move this around a lot. You're pretty much kind of finished right there. So now that we have the assembly out, we can actually clean these up and replace our traction tires, which you can see right here are a mess. It's all over my hands already just because it's such a messy, once they get gooey and everything like that, they're just a mess. Okay, so we're going to clean this up and replace our traction tires with some new ones we got from Lionel. And then we will sort of do the reverse. But the main thing is to make sure when you're reassembling it that the shock absorber springs, which are right underneath here. I don't want to, let me see if I can lower the camera here a little bit so we can get a better angle of it. But basically, you do want to make sure that, one, you don't lose those springs, and that, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit right here. But you can see it right here, right? You see that little spring right there. And again, there's a spring inside of a spring. And these have to go back exactly the right way. And you have to make sure they're trapped underneath the pin here that's on the bottom of this bearing. Okay, so a little finicky, not impossible. The hardest piece is going to getting those little C-clips back on, because you can't really do it without the finest needle nose pliers. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, that's what we gotta do. So let me go clean up the wheel and get the new traction tire on, and then we'll come back. Alright, so I got one traction tire on right here, brand new, great. So here's how you do it. So when you get your new traction tires, they're going to be a lot smaller than the original ones, and they're not going to want to fit on here. So what you do is you kind of put them on one side. If you have a little tool like a pick tool is all you really need, and you're going to just wrap it around there and sort of stretch it around with the tool until you get it all the way around, and then just make sure it doesn't flip over on you like it just did there. And you're just going to run this tool around until it's on there, and then you see there's my traction tire now. It's all seated in the thing here, all ready to go. Here's all the old gunk and everything that was inside there from the other one breaking down. So now I have 2 brand new traction tires on my axle right here, and I'm ready to put it back into my engine. So now what we have to do is not only get this back into the holes that it was in, but we have to make sure we get these little bearings situated with the springs on there, and then put the little pins in. So that's the next step, and this is going to be probably the, one of the finicky steps here, to make sure that everything is seated correctly. But the key is to make sure that spring that is within a spring is in each pocket, and then you put the axle in, and then when you push these bearings down into their slots, to make sure that the little pin that's sticking out is engaging in the big spring, and then you slide your little pin in to lock it all together. Okay, so this is what it should look like right here. It's really hard to show this on the camera, but basically right here you see the spring within a spring, and then there's a little pin right here that engages in the top of this spring, and then this obviously engages over here in the slot for the pin to go through, right? Now this little decorative detail, this wire right here, this actually spins on that wire. You're not actually bending the wire, it actually spins on it. It's just like a, the wire comes up and it has a 90-degree angle that goes into that bearing cup, right? So you're not breaking anything. You just be very careful with it when you're doing it. That's all you have to do. But the key is to make sure that once you get your axle back in, this spring is still there where it's supposed to be inside this pocket, and inside the pocket there's another spring inside the spring. If you don't see two springs in there, then you got a problem, right? So you have to end up in the end with these two springs, one inside the other, and then put those in the pocket. Alright, so let me get these in the pocket and then we'll get the axle back in. Alright, so what'll happen here is the little spring, that double spring, will be right underneath the pin on this bearing, and then you just slide that into the slot and put your pin in. And if it's in there correctly, when you push down on the bearing, it should move. Like, you should get a spring action right here. If you don't get that, that means you're not inside the spring and you need to take it apart and fix it. Okay? And then the next step is to get the little C-clips back onto the other side of these pins. Now this is going to be the hardest part. These clips are super small and there's no needle nose pliers that at least I've ever seen that's small enough to handle these. So it's going to be sort of a little bit of a screwdriver, magnetic, and a little pressure to get it back on there. Now they should clip on pretty easily, but still, they're probably going to drop through a couple times, so you have to get screwdriver, pull them out again, and do that. But let me get those two back on. Alright, so we got our C-clips back on here. It took me like 15 minutes. It's really tough to get these in because you got to sort of lay them on top and then sort of push down so they clip around the shaft, right? So not easy. But once you get that done, then you can take your bottom cover over your gears. Just make sure all your gears are seated and aligned. These want to pop out if I try to roll this, right? So make sure they're all completely seated down. Just check them all, make sure nothing's sticking up. Turn the wheel a little bit if they're sticking up, and then you just take your cover, right, and you're going to pop that right on top there. Everything should go flat, and then we're just going to put our 4 screws back in, and then we're going to put our collector back on, and we're finished. Okay, one other note. So you'll put your little cover back on here, right? Make sure everything's seated like I said before. Once you do that, then you got to put your collector back on. But if you notice in the hole here for the collector, for the screw that goes down inside here, you can see little brass threads, right? If you don't see those brass threads, that means the little piece that attaches to the wire fell through to the bottom. So I don't know if you can see it on the side here at all, but it's right here, and it basically slides up. There's like a little shaft that slides up there that has the threads in it. If it falls down, when you try to put your collector on, you won't have anything to screw into. So just take a needle nose, grab the end of the wire, and push the piece back up in the hole. You'll see your threads there, and now you can actually screw in your collector. So just a little tip right there that you might wonder, why isn't it basically grabbing onto the threads? That's why it fell through. Alright, another quick tip here is when you're taking these bearing journals out of here, so you take the pin out and you take your clip off, right, and take the pin out. If you want to lift it straight up instead of having to deal with this little wire that's going on here, this actually does detach from here. You can actually pull this out. It's like a 90-degree angle. It's just a wire, just like a handrail on an engine or something. And you can pull that out and release it from this. And that'll make it a lot easier to work with. First of all, when you're putting the truck back down into the slot, right, you can line up the spring with the pin that's on the bottom of the journal, and much easier. And then put the plate on, and then you can put your wire back on after you get the pin in and everything like that. So that's a quick tip that I sort of discovered later on. And the reason I discovered that is because I ran into an issue when I was replacing the traction tires on the rear truck, or it was the front truck, I believe. And that is this right here. So what happened? Well, zinc rot. The little piece here that has the little hole in it where the pin goes through, this whole thing just disintegrated. It was like clay, basically. You can see all the little parts I got in the tray here. 2 of them broke on the same truck. It just disintegrated basically in my hand. So yeah. So I did hear rumors about this particular model having problems with zinc rot. So it actually does. So I had to get another truck to pull these journal bearings out of to replace the ones that were on here, which is what I did. So luckily the non-powered trucks are still available from Lionel. They're not cheap, 75 bucks a pop. But the trucks, whether they're powered or non-powered, are the same as far as all the pieces. It just doesn't have all the gearing in it. So these little bearing journals, I took off a non-powered truck and then put them on here, and they're the exact same part and everything. And so I fixed this powered unit now. But yeah, these completely fell apart when I was just taking them out, and I didn't even touch them. As soon as I pulled the pin out, it just sort of fell apart. So just something to keep in mind with a 15-year-old model like this. If you're thinking of buying this, there is a possibility you get zinc rot. The powered trucks are no longer available. They're out of stock at Lionel. The only ones available right now are the non-powered, and how many of those will last, who knows. So I picked up a couple just so I'd have spare parts within here, whether it's the frame or the journals itself, or whatever it may be. So just keep that in mind. So and that's it. So I think we're good. I cleaned everything up. We're ready to put it on the track and just make sure everything works correctly, forward and reverse, and then we'll be done. So I don't know if you can see this, but this bearing journal right here, I don't know if you can see it, it's completely all cracked. It's complete zinc rot. Like if I touch this, it's gonna fall all apart, right? So the trucks are not the problem. The trucks don't seem to have any kind of problem with zinc rot. It's these bearing journals, for whatever reason they do. And so there's actually, out of the 8 that are on here, 4 are bad and have this zinc rot that are falling apart, right? So eventually they're going to break and fall apart, and then it's going to be completely useless. So like I said, I ordered a new set of dummy trucks from Lionel, which are the exact same trucks that have these journal bearings in them, and swap out the journal bearings, and then you're good until those go bad, which who knows if it was just a partial part of the run or when it happened. But these are definitely an issue with this particular model. So I'd have to say that if you were thinking about getting this model, you really need a magnifying glass to see this zinc rot. Like the camera's picking it up pretty well here, but if you're just looking at it with your bare eye, you will not notice it, right? Because it just looks like some of the detail in the truck itself. Until you get a really good close-up of it, then is when you will actually see that there's actually a problem with this stuff. The camera can't even get that close on it, but hopefully you can see it's all cracked completely all around here. So keep that in mind. I would probably have to say, if you were going to get an Acela set, you might as well wait for the new ones coming out from Lionel and avoid these. Of course, you wouldn't have the opening doors, but that's just you also won't have zinc rot and your truck's falling apart on you after 10 years or whenever it is. So but luckily I can get the parts for these, and I'm going to replace all these bad journal bearings, and I'll be all set. All right, and that's it. And then just a little cleanup to clean up any grease. I use JT Mega Steam's Be Gone cleaner. I don't know if you ever use this stuff. I've been using this for years and years, and this stuff basically just takes away all oily residue of anything. So whether it's just oil or smoke fluid or whatever it is, if you just run it on there and it dries with no residue at all, and it'll clean it right up, and you'll never have to it's great for smoke fluid basically, and it won't ruin the paint finish on the train either. So just keep that in mind. If you've never used it before, just get a little bottle. It's worth it. I actually have the full-size refill bottle, because I go through this stuff all the time just because it's so good. But just a little plug for JT's Mega Steam on their product called Be Gone. It's really good. All right, and so that is it for the traction tire install on the Acela. So again, if everything's working correctly, these will spring up and down on the drive wheels. And again, you won't be able to turn these because everything should be locked against the motor. So if you have all your gears in place and nothing's moved around, Just don't flip it over or your gears are going to fall out all over the place. Unfortunately, I got to do this again on the front motor truck and replace these two over here. This one you can see over here is really messed up. It's all gooey. So that's it. And really the most tedious part of the whole thing is just getting those C-clips back on the pins that hold the bearing caps in, and at the same time making sure you got those double springs in the pocket and also the little pin that sticks out from the bearing seated inside that spring. If you get all that together, then you'll be good to go and you'll get a new set of traction tires on your Acela. Okay guys, that's it. That's how you Acela owners will replace your traction tires on your engines. It is a fiddly little process, a lot of detailed and very tiny parts you have to go through. Just be really careful, be patient, and if you're having trouble, walk away and then come back in a couple minutes. I'm sure it'll all work out fine. So that's our first episode on the Workbench, and I will see you guys next time.